Politicians want you to think they're all good people. They smile with babies, show love for their spouses, and promise to make things better, but sometimes they get caught up in some shady stuff. Nowadays, it's easy to catch politicians doing bad things. The news is always looking for juicy stories to tell, so they don't let anything slide. But it wasn't always like this. In the past, it was hard for journalists to find out the truth about politicians. That's why we're going to take a trip back in time to look at some of the craziest scandals that happened in history. These scandals were so big that they blew up in the news and stained the careers of the politicians involved. So let's take a trip into the past and uncover scandalous stories that show what politicians were really like. Adams versus Jackson. In the 1824 election, no candidate won enough votes to become president. So Congress had to decide between Andrew Jackson, a famous war hero seen as an outsider to Washington politics, and John Quincy Adams, a seasoned statesman and son of a founding father. Before the vote, a powerful politician named Henry Clay said he would support Adams. Congress then chose Adams as president, but when Adams made Clay his Secretary of State, Jackson and his supporters accused them of making a secret deal, calling it a corrupt bargain. They said Clay helped Adams win in exchange for a job. This made Jackson's followers angry because Jackson had won the most votes from regular people in electoral votes. This accusation rallied Jackson's supporters and other people who wanted change. They later elected Jackson as president in 1828 and formed what we now know as the Democratic Party. Andrew Johnson's impeachment after President Abraham Lincoln was killed in 1865, his vice president Andrew Johnson became president. Johnson had been on the Union side during the Civil War, but he didn't agree with giving newly freed slaves the right to vote or with other plans to rebuild the country after the war. This caused a lot of arguments with the radical Republicans, who were in charge of Congress and wanted big changes. In 1867, Congress made a law called the Tenure of Office Act. It said that the president couldn't fire government officials without Congress agreeing. Johnson didn't like this law and tried to fire Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, who was picked by Lincoln and supported the radical Republicans. Even though Johnson said no, Congress tried to remove him from office. They held a long trial, but they were one vote short of the number they needed to kick him out of the White House. The whiskey trial during President Ulysses Grant's time in office, whiskey makers were upset about having to pay taxes to the government on the whiskey they made. Things got serious in 1875 when Grant's Treasury Secretary Benjamin Bristow found out that some whiskey makers were trying to cheat the government out of taxes. They were also trying to bribe officials at the IRS and Treasury to ignore what they were doing. Bristow's investigation led to 238 people being charged with crimes, and 110 of them were found guilty. Even President Grant's personal secretary, Orville Babcock, got caught up in the scandal. When Babcock went to trial, President Grant stood up for him in court. Grant even went as far as to testify on Babcock's behalf, saying he was innocent. This made Grant the first president ever to testify in a criminal case while still in office. The Trading Post scandal. During President Ulysses Grant's second term, there was a big scandal involving his Secretary of War, William Belknap. As Secretary of War, Belknap had the power to choose who could run trading posts at military forts. These trading posts sold things to soldiers and Native Americans, often at high prices. In 1876, a group in Congress found out that Belknap was secretly taking money from a trading post at Fort Sill, which is in Oklahoma today. He was getting the money through someone connected to his first wife. Even after his first wife died and he got married again, the payments kept coming. This explained how Belknap could afford to throw fancy parties in Washington even though he was paid by the government. The House of Representatives said Belknap had used his power for his own benefit and forced him to quit. Later, the Senate tried to charge him with corruption, but they didn't have enough votes to kick him out. Falls oil corruption. In 1922, during President Warren Harding's time in office, his Interior Secretary, Albert Fall, did something shady. Fall arranged for the Department of Interior to take control of oil reserves on government land in Wyoming. Then, he gave special contracts to big oil companies without letting anyone else bid for them. This meant these companies got to make lots of money by drilling for oil and gas on that land, but things went wrong when a smaller oil company in Wyoming complained to their senator about not being able to bid for the contracts. The Senate started looking into it. They found out that Fall had taken bribes and other gifts in exchange for letting certain companies drill on the land. Fall was found guilty, and he became the first person who used to be in the president's cabinet to go to prison. Watergate. In June 1972, just before President Richard Nixon was chosen again to run for president, 5 guys got caught breaking into the Democratic Party's office at the Watergate building in Washington, D.C. These guys turned out to be linked to Nixon's team, which started a big investigation by the news, the FBI, and Congress. Nixon and his friends tried to hide their connection to the break-in and stop people from finding out what really happened. As they kept digging, they found out that this break-in was just one part of a big plan to spy on Nixon's enemies and mess up their plans. This plan included listening in on phone calls, breaking into offices, and Nixon secretly recording conversation. When this came out, Nixon and his team tried to cover it up. They destroyed evidence, paid off the burglars, and did other sneaky stuff. The scandal got even worse when tapes of conversations in Nixon's office revealed that Nixon himself was part of the cover-up. Because of all this, people got really mad. Nixon's approval ratings dropped, and he knew he was going to get kicked out of office. So, on August 8, 1974, Nixon became the first U.S. president to resign while still in office. Some of Nixon's friends ended up in jail because of what they did. After Watergate, the government made changes to try to stop this kind of thing from happening again. They made new rules to make sure that the government is more honest and people in power are watched more closely. The Watergate scandal is still remembered today as a big warning about how power can be misused. The Iran-Contra affair. During the 1980s, there was a war between Iran and Iraq. Iran needed weapons, but because of an issue called the Iran hostage crisis, the U.S. had stopped selling them weapons. Then, some Americans got taken hostage in Lebanon. These Americans were held by a group linked to Iran, and this happened while there was a war going on in Lebanon. Even though there was a rule against selling weapons to Iran, the Reagan government decided to sell them missiles. Surprisingly, when these missiles were sold, the group holding the hostages started letting them go. When people found out about this deal in 1986, Reagan admitted that they did sell the weapons to Iran. However, he said there wasn't any deal to trade weapons for hostages. But then, it came out that some of the money from selling the missiles was missing. It turned out that Oliver North, who worked for Reagan, used this money to support a group called the Contras in Nicaragua. These Contras were fighting against the government there. This plan to help the Contras broke a rule made by Congress called the Boland Amendment. This rule prohibited the use of federal funds to support military activities in Nicaragua, especially to aid the Contras, a rebel group fighting the Nicaraguan government. Because of this, 14 people close to President Reagan faced consequences for their involvement, but Reagan himself avoided charges because there wasn't enough direct evidence linking him to the illegal activities. However, in a televised speech in 1987, Reagan admitted that weapons were indeed traded with Iran to secure the release of hostages. Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. In November 1995, President Bill Clinton started a relationship with Monica Lewinsky, who was just 22 years old. Monica had started working as an intern at the White House that summer, and later she got a paid job there in December. But then, in April 1996, Monica was moved to work at the Pentagon because people were worried she was spending too much time with the president. While she was there, she told her coworker, Linda Tripp, about the relationship she had with the president. Linda secretly recorded their conversations and later gave them to Kenneth Starr, who was looking into whether Clinton had mistreated another woman named Paula Jones. After their affair scandal came out, Clinton and Monica were asked about their relationship during the case with Paula Jones. They both said it didn't happen, but this turned out to be a lie, and Clinton got in trouble for lying under oath. Clinton faced impeachment proceedings in the House of Representatives on charges of perjury and obstruction of justice. The House impeached him, but the Senate acquitted him in the ensuing trial, allowing him to remain in office for the rest of his term. Monica Lewinsky, on the other hand, faced intense media scrutiny and public ridicule for her involvement in the affair. She struggled to find employment and faced significant personal challenges due to the notoriety of the scandal. Over time, both Clinton and Lewinsky moved on from the scandal, with Clinton continuing his career in politics and advocacy work, while Lewinsky pursued various endeavors, including writing, public speaking, and activism against cyberbullying and public shaming. John Ensign scandal. John Ensign was a senator from Nevada who was a Republican Party favorite before he got caught up in a series of scandals. And one of the scandals was about an affair he had, which is quite interesting. Ensign had a relationship with the wife of one of his campaign workers. When the husband found out, the couple began extorting him, and he paid $96,000 to both of them to keep it a secret. On top of that, he helped the husband, Douglas Hampton, get a new job as a lobbyist, even though there's a rule that says politicians can't do that. For a year after leaving office, Ensign broke this rule to cover his affair, and eventually, when the extortion got worse, he had to disclose all of it to make it stop. Douglas Hampton, the husband, had a tough time because of all this. He publicly stated that Ensign was behind everything, but Ensign didn't face any consequences. He gave up his job as a politician in 2011 and went back to working as a successful veterinarian. It was a messy situation, and it left Hampton's life in ruins, even though he said Ensign was to blame for everything. Donald Trump's first impeachment shortly after the Mueller report came out, saying there was no proof that Donald Trump's campaign worked with Russia in the 2016 election. Nancy Pelosi, who leads the House, said they were going to check if Trump did anything wrong in a different matter. This new issue came from a talk Trump had with Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, in 2019. In this phone call, Trump asked Zelensky to look into Joe Biden and his son, who had a job in a Ukrainian company. At the same time, Trump stopped giving money to Ukraine. Some people thought this was Trump trying to use his power as president to hurt Biden, his rival in the next election. In December 2019, the House decided Trump did something wrong, so they charged him with trying to block justice and misuse his power. But when the Senate had a trial to decide if Trump should be impeached out of office, they said no. They needed 2/3 of the votes, and they didn't get enough, so Trump stayed as president. Donald Trump's second impeachment. Donald Trump faced his second impeachment in 2021, making him the first president to be impeached twice. This came after a violent event at the Capitol building on January 6th, when Trump's supporters stormed inside as Congress was confirming his loss in the 2020 election. Just a week later, the House of Representatives said Trump had encouraged the crowd to do this, hoping it would change the election results. The House accused him of inciting the riot, and they voted to impeach him again. After that, there was a trial in the Senate to decide if Trump should lose his job. But in the end, the Senate said no, and Trump stayed as president. This was Trump's second time facing impeachment during his time in the White House. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned. More interesting tidbits on scandals all through United States history.